Marcus hadn't called in 14 months. Not once. That alone should have told me everything I needed to know about where we stood. But when my phone buzzed that Tuesday evening and his name flashed across the screen, something stirred in my chest, a flutter I hadn't felt in ages, like hope trying to resurrect itself from the ashes of disappointment. "Hey Mom." His voice carried that casual tone he'd perfected, the one that made everything sound normal, even when it wasn't. "Listen, we're throwing a surprise birthday party for little Emma next weekend. Sarah thought it would be great if you could make it." Emma, my granddaughter, 7 years old now, with Marcus's stubborn chin and her mother's bright laugh. I pictured her gap-toothed smile, the way she used to climb into my lap and ask me to read the same fairy tale 3 times in a row. "That sounds wonderful," I managed, my voice steadier than my hands. "I'd love to be there." Marcus chuckled, and for a moment, he sounded like the boy who used to help me bake chocolate chip cookies, stealing dough when he thought I wasn't looking. "Sarah specifically requested those sugar cookies you used to make, the ones with the cracked edges and cinnamon glaze." Outside my kitchen window, rain had started to fall, the kind of gentle shower that makes the world look softer around the edges. I stood there for a full minute after we hung up, just holding the phone, watching droplets race down the glass. "This is it," I told myself. "This is the beginning of something new. Maybe time really does heal all wounds. Maybe being a grandmother doesn't have to be a losing game." I packed slowly that evening, taking my time with each decision. The navy dress I'd been saving for special occasions, yes, the hand-knitted scarf I'd made for Emma last Christmas but never had the chance to give her definitely, and tucked deep in my purse, wrapped in tissue paper, a photo of Marcus and me from when he was 12, all braces and awkward limbs. Still young enough to hold his mother's hand in public without embarrassment. That photo stayed hidden in the lining of my purse, not to give, just to remember. There's something about preparing for a journey when you're older. You don't rush. You touch everything twice, wondering how the house will feel empty for a few days. You close the refrigerator door more gently, water the plants more slowly. You treat each familiar ritual like it might be the last time. I barely slept that night, not from worry, but from anticipation. It had been so long since I'd had something to look forward to that wasn't a pharmacy discount or a new soup recipe. Friday morning found me standing by my front door at 7:45 a.m., suitcase at my feet, checking my watch for the 3rd time. Marcus had said he'd pick me up around 8. It's funny how when you're waiting for someone you love, 5 minutes can feel like 50. He pulled up at 8:20, windows down, music blaring way too loud for a morning. But he was smiling that easy, careless smile that had charmed teachers and neighbors since he was 5 years old. I smiled back because that's what mothers do, even when they don't know what comes next. They smile. They hope. "Ready for this, Mom?" he asked as I approached the car. "More than ready," I replied, and I meant it. But he drove past the airport. Instead, he pulled up to the side entrance of Union Station, the old train depot downtown. The morning sky was clear, but the air still held that early quiet, no traffic. No rush, just the low hum of birds and an occasional car passing by. Marcus leaned over and popped the trunk. "Here we go," he said, but he didn't get out. He just sat there, fingers drumming on the steering wheel like he had somewhere more important to be. I climbed out, feeling a slight twinge in my knees from the sudden movement. He didn't get out to help with my suitcase. Just stayed in the driver's seat, engine running. I pulled my bag to the curb, and he rolled down the window. "I already got your ticket," he called out. "Just go inside and wait. The train should be here soon. I've got to run a quick errand, grab some coffee before heading home." Something about the new supplier being a complete mess. He flashed me that smile again. Not warm, not cold, just quick, like someone flicking a light switch on and off. Before I could say anything, he shifted into drive and pulled away. No hug, no backward glance, just taillights disappearing down the street. I stood there with my suitcase, watching him go, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not heartbreaks, something quieter, like understanding. The station was old, unchanged since the vinyl seating of the 1970s. Plastic chairs bolted to the floor, 2 humming vending machines in the corner, a wall clock that ticked louder than it should. I found the ticket counter and gave my name to the woman behind the glass. She typed something, frowned, shook her head. "Are you sure it was purchased today?" she asked. I nodded. She looked again, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's no reservation under that name." I checked my purse. No paper ticket, no email confirmation. My phone was at 3% battery, and I didn't see a charger in my bag. I sat by the window, suitcase standing beside me like a loyal friend, and waited. Minutes 10:30. No call, no text, no Marcus. I tried not to let my thoughts spiral. He was busy, I told myself. Maybe he got held up. Maybe the ticket would show up soon. Maybe there was just some confusion at the counter. Another hour passed. I got up and walked outside, hoping maybe I'd see the familiar silver SUV coming back around the corner. But the curb was empty. Just a stray dog in the parking lot, and an elderly man buying a newspaper from the stand. Back inside. The plastic seats felt harder this time, the silence louder. I sat there, pulled my coat tighter, and stared at the same clock. The second hand moved steady and smooth, like it had nowhere else to be and like the person who was supposed to be there with me. I didn't know it yet, but I wasn't a passenger anymore. I was the one left behind. I sat there as long as I could. When another hour had passed, I stood up and paced the small terminal. The attendant behind the glass gave me sideways glances but said nothing. No one said anything. I was just another elderly woman waiting for something nobody else understood. I tried Marcus's number again. This time it rang once before going straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. My voice felt stuck in my throat. I didn't trust it to sound calm. Outside, the sky had grown clearer, but clouds were gathering near the horizon. I searched the parking lot again, even checked behind the building, as if Marcus might suddenly appear like a bad magic trick. But there was no sign of him, not even a trace of the car. I walked to the edge of the curb, hoping for a taxi or maybe a rideshare. My phone's screen was black now, battery dead, no charger. Just me and the low hum of wind passing through. I stopped a woman who looked kind enough and asked if I could borrow her phone for a quick call. She hesitated but handed it over. I dialed Marcus again. One ring, then a quick click. He'd declined the call. I returned the phone and thanked her. She didn't ask questions, just nodded and walked away. Back inside, the bench felt harder than before. I opened my purse and checked every pocket twice. Found a crumpled $10 bill next to some tissues. That was all the cash I had. I hadn't packed my purse thinking I'd need money. I wasn't supposed to be traveling alone. I looked around the waiting room. A young man with headphones, a woman with 2 children sleeping in her lap. Nobody was looking at me. That might have hurt more than if they had been staring. At least then I would have existed in someone's eyes. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, quiet and still. The clock kept ticking, that same steady second hand, indifferent and unworried. A gentle voice broke through my thoughts. You look like you could use something warm. I looked up. An older woman about my age stood there holding a to-go cup. She wore a denim jacket, a small scarf at her neck, and had kind eyes. She introduced herself as Helen and said her bookshop was across the street. Nothing fancy, she explained, just paperbacks and bad coffee, but it was warm. She said I could sit for a while if I wanted. No pressure. I nodded. I didn't have the energy to refuse. We crossed the street slowly, the wheels of my suitcase catching on the sidewalk cracks. Helen noticed and slowed her pace to match mine. She didn't talk much after that, just guided me through the front door of her shop and pointed to an old armchair near the window. She didn't ask what had happened, just let me sit there. And for the first time that day, I let myself stop pretending. I was okay. The shop smelled like old pages, and something faintly toasted, not hot, not sweet, more like leftover tea and dust. It was quiet, but not the kind of silence that stings. This settled around you, let you breathe in it. Helen moved behind the counter without a word, plugged in a small electric kettle, pulled 2 chipped mugs from a shelf. Her hands moved slowly, but there was no tremor in them, just the steady confidence of age lived well and firmly. I sank into the armchair by the front window. It was deep and low, the kind that forces your spine to settle. My coat was still draped over my purse in my lap. I didn't move much. I wasn't ready for that yet. Helen served the tea and handed me a cup without questions, without small talk, just the quiet kindness of someone who had clearly been there before. We sat like that for a while. I watched cars pass outside, a group of teenagers laughing loudly as they walked by. Their joy felt so distant from where I was sitting that it seemed like another country. I took a sip of the tea. It was bitter, the kind of bitter that grows on you if you let it. Eventually, Helen spoke. She said she'd been running the shop for almost 30 years. People didn't read like they used to, she mentioned, but she kept the doors open anyway. There was something about the weight of books that anchored her in a way nothing else could. I nodded. I understood. You can measure a whole life by the books you keep. She didn't ask my name or why I was there, just talked quietly, like we were old friends. She mentioned that once. She'd been left at a bus station in Cleveland, said it wasn't the same as being forgotten, it was worse. It was like being made invisible. I looked down at my hands. They weren't shaken either, but they stayed clenched. My fingers pressed firmly around the ceramic mug. I hadn't cried, not even at the station. But in that chair, hearing the soft creak of floorboards under Helen's feet, something inside me bent a little. She walked to a shelf in the back, pulled out a book, and placed it beside me. She said I could read it or just hold it sometimes. The weight of a story helped more than the story itself. The cover was worn, the title half faded, but the spine held strong. I sat there for a long time. I didn't open it, just let it rest. In my lap, this small, solid thing that hadn't abandoned me. Late in the afternoon, the sky outside turned gray. Helen handed me a blanket and said I could stay as long as I needed. No rush, no clock to watch. I stayed. That night, I slept in a bookshop with my coat as a pillow, a closed book in my lap, and a half-full cup of cold tea. Somehow, I felt safer there than I had in a long time. The next morning, I woke to the sound of someone turning pages. Helen was already at the counter, her glasses sliding down her nose, reading something old and heavy. The shop felt warmer than it had the night before, maybe. I was just feeling it differently. She made oatmeal on a small hot plate behind the counter. no sugar, no milk. Just plain oats with a handful of raisins. I ate it slowly, each bite, deliberate, letting the warmth spread through my chest. After I finished, she handed me a clean dish towel and nodded toward the small sink. That's how we said thank you. By noon, I told her I needed to go home. She didn't ask where that was, just handed me a paper bag with 2 granola bars, a bottle of water, and a folded umbrella. She said she had a feeling the sky wasn't ready yet. Was right. During the bus ride home, rain drummed against the windows like it knew something I didn't. I sat near the back, my suitcase on the floor between my feet. When I got back to my apartment, everything felt heavier. I hung up my damp coat, set my suitcase by the door, and went straight to the small filing cabinet in my bedroom closet. The drawer stuck a little from the humidity, but I worked it open. There, in the middle folder, were the papers Marcus probably hoped I'd forgotten about. The trust fund, the one my late husband had set up before his first surgery. The fund that was supposed to eventually go to Marcus and Emma, but I was still the primary administrator. I took the folder and sat at my dining room table, flipping through every page. The terms were clear. Funds could only be released with my written approval. There was a clause about mental competency, a safeguard my husband had insisted on after seeing what happened to his own mother. Any claims of diminished capacity required independent medical verification. I knew what Marcus had been trying to do. I'd felt it for months in the way he talked to me, slow and condescending. The way he double-checked everything I said. He offered to help manage my mail and handle my appointments, always with that same gentle voice that carried a quiet insult underneath. I opened the envelope hidden behind the last page. It contained a recent letter from the bank, a notification that Marcus had submitted a request to initiate a partial withdrawal. It also included a letter signed in my name, authorizing the release, but it wasn't my signature. I stared at it for a long time. The loops were wrong. The slant was too sharp. He'd copied it from the birthday cards I used to send Emma. He must have thought I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't even check. I folded the papers back up, placed them carefully in a new envelope, and set it aside. He thought I was slipping, but I remembered everything, especially this. The next morning, I called Robert, using the old landline in my kitchen. He answered on the second ring. His voice hadn't changed, still deep and steady, like someone who'd spent a lifetime reading contracts and catching people's mistakes. I told him I needed to come by. He didn't ask why, just gave me a time. I took the bus downtown. The rain had stopped, but everything still looked wet, the sidewalks gleaming like someone had poured varnish over them. Robert's office was in a quiet brick building, nestled between a post office and a law library. I hadn't been there since my husband's funeral. He opened the door before I even knocked, let me in with a nod, and offered me the same brown leather chair I used to sit in when we signed the original version of the trust. It still creaked the same way when I leaned back. I slid the forged letter across his desk. He didn't pick it up immediately, just looked at it, then at me. You remember what we wrote in the original documents? He asked. I nodded. Every word. He opened the drawer under his desk and pulled out a red folder marked with my husband's initials. Inside was a sealed envelope I'd never seen before. Robert broke the seal and unfolded the contents. It was an addendum to the fund, signed 6 months before my husband's death, a clause that had never been triggered before. It stated that if any beneficiary attempted to manipulate, forge, or coerce the administrator in any way, the fund would be immediately frozen, permanent disqualification unless reinstated by unanimous vote of 2 appointed legal advisors, both already deceased. Robert placed the page in front of me and tapped the paragraph with his finger. This gives us authority to act. All we need is written notice and evidence. I had the letter Marcus had forged. He handed me a pen. I signed. He made a call to the financial institution. His tone never rose or fell, just flat and calm. He stated the clause, cited the section. The call named me as active administrator, with full control. When he hung up, the account was frozen. No access, no notification to Marcus. I leaned back in that chair and stared at the framed painting on the wall, a quiet forest, with a path of golden leaves disappearing into a soft blur. My husband had chosen it, said it reminded him of the woods behind his childhood home. I'd never liked it much. Too quiet, too uncertain. But that day, I understood it a little better. Robert slid the folder back into the drawer and locked it. He didn't say anything else, just walked me to the door, put his hand on my shoulder, and waited for me to breathe. He didn't say goodbye. I just left. And for the first time in weeks, my steps felt like mine again. I got home that afternoon and didn't bother taking off my shoes. I went straight to the kitchen table, took out Robert's envelope, and placed it next to my notepad. The bank had frozen the fund, but that wasn't enough for me. I sat down, clicked on the old desk lamp, and began to write a letter. Not to Marcus. That part of me had already gone quiet. I wrote to the Inspector General's office. I listed everything: the forged signature, the false claims, the attempted legal fraud. I made sure to include dates, names, institutions. I wasn't interested in drama, just the quiet, complete truth. I attached copies of the forged document and Robert's statement, signed everything in blue ink, sealed the envelope and put it in my purse. The post office was only 4 blocks away, and the air that night was sharp, and still the kind of air that makes you feel awake in a way coffee never could. I mailed the letter with delivery confirmation, watched the clerk stamp it and toss it into the canvas bin, as if it weren't holding the weight of a family breaking apart. I didn't hesitate, just turned and walked home. At home, I opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out my checkbook. I hadn't used it in months. I sat at the table and began writing small checks, one to the retirement fund I'd left behind, one to the heating company to pay for winter service in advance, and one to a local literacy group I used to volunteer for before. Marcus told me I was too tired to keep doing things like that. Each check felt like a small reclamation, not revenge, just restoration. 2 days later, Robert called. Marcus had finally made contact. He wanted answers. Robert told him the truth. The fund was frozen. The documents were under investigation. There would be no access, no payments. More quiet theft. Marcus didn't call me. He didn't leave a voicemail, but I knew he'd heard. The silence said more than words could. Later that week, I went to the bank alone, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to look the teller in the eye when I asked her to confirm my control of the account. She looked at the screen, then at me, and nodded. I was still the only authorized party, still the one who decided what happened next. I left with the receipt folded in my coat pocket. It was just a piece of paper, but my hand stayed on it the whole way home, like it might float away if I let go. That night, I had tea at the kitchen table, lights off except for the stove light. Outside, the street was quiet. Inside my chest, it didn't feel tight anymore. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made a scene. But he no longer had access to what he thought was already his, and I had reclaimed what was always mine. The call came through the apartment intercom on a Wednesday morning. I was folding towels on the living room couch when the buzzer rang. I startled more than I should have, wiped my hands, and pressed the button. It was a delivery driver. A large envelope from a courier service. No return address. Just my name, typed cleanly on the label. I signed without asking and took it inside. I already knew what it was before I opened it. Inside was a copy of a letter Marcus had sent to the legal review board. It was defensive, full of long paragraphs about communication, failures, misunderstandings, shifting responsibility, he claimed. I had forgotten conversations, confused timelines. There were no apologies, just a series of carefully worded justifications. He never used the word forgery, never acknowledged the letter he'd forged himself. Instead, he painted a picture of himself as a concerned son trying to do the right thing. Attached was a second documenta, signed statement from a family doctor I hadn't seen in 3 years. The date had been altered. The assessment was vague. Nowhere did it declare incompetence, just an observation about stress, aging, and forgetfulness. Words that could bend in whatever direction you wanted. I set the papers aside. My hands didn't shake. I'd already learned what it felt like to be quietly erased. What stayed with me wasn't the letter. It was what I found later that afternoon. Gone out for groceries, just milk, some bread, and apples. When I came back, the light on my answering machine was blinking. 2 messages. The first was from the clinic, confirming my next physical exam. The second was from Emma. Her voice was cautious, smaller than I remembered. She said she'd heard things. Wasn't sure what was happening, but wanted to just say hi. Nothing more. She didn't leave a callback number. Didn't say where she was staying. Guess said she missed the cookies I used to make, and hung up. It didn't sound like a message she was supposed to leave. It sounded like one she whispered when no one else was in the room. I sat on the edge of the kitchen chair, one hand still holding the grocery bag, and let her voice play twice. Then I deleted it. Not out of anger, but out of something deeper. Knowledge. She wasn't calling for me. She was calling for a version of me that had become distant. She didn't have all the facts yet, but she was starting to see the cracks. I went back to unpacking groceries. Put the apples in the bowl on the counter, the bread in the drawer, the milk in the fridge. The world hadn't stopped, but it had shifted. Slightly, quietly, the kind of change you only notice when the silence starts stretching in the wrong direction. And in that quiet, I understood. He was no longer in control, but he hadn't realized it yet. It was Robert who suggested we meet in person again. Said there was something I needed to hear, something he didn't want to say over the phone. We met at a diner on Elm Street, the kind with cracked leather booths and waitresses who never wrote anything down. I arrived early and sat facing the door. Robert came in 10 minutes later, carrying a manila folder, and looking more tired than usual. He slid into the seat across from me, ordered black coffee, and didn't bother with small talk. He placed the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were dozens of printed emails, most from Marcus, some from someone at the bank, one from a lawyer I didn't recognize. They all revolved around the same topic: leverage strategy for access. Robert touched one in particular. It was dated 2 weeks before I'd gotten that phone call about Emma's party. In it, Marcus outlined a plan to isolate me temporarily. Nothing explicit, just coded language. Words like compliance, streamlining, managing the transition. He hadn't been just hoping I'd disappear. He'd been actively arranging it. The invitation, the train station, the timing, none of it was accidental. Robert leaned back while I read, didn't interrupt, didn't soften the truth. I closed the folder and let my hands rest on top of it. They felt heavier now. Not from shock, but from clarity. I asked Robert what would happen next. He said the bank's internal review was complete. The signatures didn't match. The attempted unauthorized fund access was on record. There would be no criminal prosecution unless I filed a formal complaint. I didn't say anything, just listened. He added that a second financial institution had reached out. Marcus had tried to move assets using his own company's credentials. That movement was now flagged. I let the words settle in my chest. They didn't hit me like betrayal. They felt like confirmation. I'd known, I just hadn't seen all the edges. We sat in silence while the waitress refilled our cups. Finally, Robert stood up, handed me the folder, and told me to take my time. No rush, no deadline, just the truth, waiting for me when I was ready to use it. I walked home with the folder pressed against my chest under my coat. The air was colder than it had been in days. I didn't mind at home. I put the folder on the counter. I didn't open it again right away. Just stood there for a while, coat still on, eyes on the window where light was starting to fade. He'd made every move with the confidence of someone who believes no one is watching, but I'd already seen enough. And now I held the final piece, the one he'd forgotten I still had. The knock came just after 6. It wasn't loud, just 3 short taps, like someone testing the weight of their own presence. I sat on the couch, lights off except for the one over the sink. Through the peephole, I could see Marcus's blazer, slightly wrinkled, his phone in his hand, his shoulders straight, like he was about to give a speech. For a moment, I just watched. Let the silence fill the space between the door and my chest. He knocked again, softer this time. Then he waited. I didn't move. Eventually, I heard him sigh. He shifted from one foot to the other, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. He slid it under the door. Then silence. No goodbye. No footsteps in the hallway. Just quiet. I waited 10 full minutes before picking it up. Inside was a handwritten letter. Carefully spaced, deliberate, the kind of letter people write when they think they're out of options. He wrote that he'd made mistakes, that he'd overstepped boundaries, that he thought he was protecting me from future confusion, from financial stress, from the burden of control. He never admitted what he'd done, just circled around it with organized, distant language. He asked to meet, said he wanted to talk in person, said we needed to clear things up. I folded the letter once, put it back in the envelope, and slid it into the drawer next to my keys. I didn't plan to respond. The next morning I walked to the courthouse. Robert had already prepared the updated, documents complete revocation of Marcus's access. Emma's name removed for now. Robert said it was reversible if I decided otherwise. I signed each page carefully, firm initials in the margins. The notary stamped the final form and handed me the complete copy. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like a conclusion. On the way home, I passed a bench in the park where I used to sit with Emma when she was little. We'd feed the ducks and count the leaves turning yellow in the fall. I didn't stop, just walked past it, looking ahead. When I got home, the apartment felt brighter, not different, just cleaner, in a way only silence can bring. That night I made a small pot of soup, ate it quietly at the kitchen table. Nothing fancy, just lentils, carrots, and rosemary. I looked out the window while I ate, didn't check my mailbox, didn't look at my phone. Some things didn't need to be checked anymore. That night I slept without waking once. No dreams, no noise. Just the quiet breathing of a home no longer shared with doubt. He'd finally come to see me, but I no longer needed to be seen by him. He'd already taught me everything I needed to know by leaving me behind. He'd given me space to come back to myself. The morning was gray, but not heavy. Just quiet in a way that made decisions easier. I dressed carefully, slacks, a blouse I hadn't worn in months. The necklace with the single pearl my husband gave me on our 30th anniversary. It rested lightly against my collarbone, like a memory without bitterness. I took the bus to the bank. Same branch Marcus had used. Same building where he'd smiled at the manager, passed papers across polished counters. Pretended none of it was cruel. I walked in and asked for the senior associate. Gave my name. Waited, she came out. Within minutes, warm smile. Extended hand. Led me to a small office with frosted glass and 2 leather chairs. She'd reviewed the documents Robert sent. Everything was ready, no questions, just confirmations. I handed over the signed forms. Joint access closure, asset consolidation under my name, investment account redirection, removal of all other signatories. When she asked if I wanted to leave any notification, I shook my head. No alerts, no warnings, just finality. She stamped the last page, handed me a folder with my new statements, and thanked me for coming in personally. As I left, I passed the teller, a young man behind the glass who smiled politely. I smiled back. He reminded me of a boy Marcus used to coach in Little League. Same posture, same clean, eager look. But this one hadn't learned to pretend yet. Outside, the wind had picked up. I held my coat close, gripped the folder against my chest. At the corner, I stopped at the bakery, bought an apple pie, still warm from the oven. The woman behind the counter wrapped it carefully, added a napkin without my asking. I thanked her and walked a long way home. I ate it at the kitchen table, watching leaves flutter in the breeze outside my window. It tasted clean, not too sweet. The crust flaked without effort. I didn't rush. Later that afternoon, I opened a new account at a different bank, one Marcus didn't know about. Emma had never visited. It felt like drawing a new line in the sand, not hiding, just starting from where I was. That night, I poured myself a glass of cold water, stood at the sink and looked at the street below. Cars passed, traffic lights changed, life moved forward without asking. He'd made his moves, but the final decision was never his. And now there was nothing left to take, only what I chose to keep. A week passed without calls, letters, or unexpected knocks, just quiet, the kind that doesn't echo, just settles. I went to the bookshop again. Helen greeted me with her usual nod. No questions, no mention of the day I'd shown up with nothing but a suitcase and a shaking voice. She handed me a cup of tea, same bitter kind. I didn't mind this time. I'd grown used to its taste. I sat in the same chair by the window. This time, I brought a book. One I had chosen for myself, one I'd loved but forgotten in the noise of everything else. I read slowly, page by page, like I was returning to a part of me that had waited patiently. Later, I stopped at the market, bought fresh tomatoes with basil, a small wedge of cheese. I hadn't cooked a real meal in a while. That night, I didn't cook for anyone else, just for me. The kitchen smelled like something new was beginning, even if it didn't have a name yet. Before bed, I opened the windows, let the cold air in. It felt clean, like it was washing the walls. The space didn't feel empty. It felt restored. I folded the old letter he'd written, the one he'd slipped under my door, and put it at the bottom of the filing cabinet. Not out of sentimentality, but to remind me how far I'd come. Not everything needed to burn. Some things just needed to be put away. The next morning, I walked through the neighborhood. Fresh air, soft light. I passed the train station, the same one where he'd left me, but this time I didn't stop. I walked past it, kept going, and didn't look back. If this story reminds you of a time when you had to reclaim your own power, even quietly, I hope you know you're not alone. Sometimes the quietest victories are the ones that shape us most. If you've ever felt invisible, I see you. And if you've ever walked away without needing applause, that strength deserves to be honored. If you feel this story resonate with you, what would you have done? Would you have forgiven Marcus? Or would you have taken a different path? The choice between justice and mercy isn't always clear, but sometimes the strongest response is the one that comes from silence.